I didn't love BCG and Deutsche Bank, and I'm glad that I learned over 2 months or 3 months of interning with these companies. With HBS, there's a lot of Indians over there. Like second after the US would be Indians. My GMAT score was 730.
730. 730 you got how
Like flush median.
How did you get through? Like let's talk about this.
We have a lot of other things to solve for right now. Electricity, water, like basic infrastructural issues. I think climate is a little bit more of a luxury topic for a country like India, I'll be honest. The biggest problem with rice is it's a massive water guzzler. It takes like 3,000 liters to farm 1 kg of rice, 20 million liters per hectare. We have 46 million hectares of rice. So you do 46 million multiplied by 20 million. I don't even know how many zeros that is, right? And then the second problem, of course, with rice is the stubble burning piece, right? So rice farming is as bad as aviation.
Is MSP good or bad?
That's a great question, man. I've been asked that a lot of times.
Conversations Cafe podcast, we had someone who actually had a typical Swadesh moment in his life. We spoke to a person who went to US to study in probably the best B school in the world, where he studied almost 500 case studies. We spoke to him in detail about what exactly makes Harvard such a big place for B school students, what exactly are the kind of learnings that you can have from there, and how you can implement that in the real life after you are done with your B school journey. In this podcast, you will get to know more about starting a business in the agricultural space, starting a climate tech business. If you are a business enthusiast, which I'm sure you are because you're part of this particular channel as a subscriber, you would definitely not want to miss this podcast. If you can't watch this podcast completely, there will be clips for you in the Conversations Clips channel. Watch the shorts as well, and do share this with people who have a deep interest in learning more about the world of agriculture, climate tech, and business. The podcast with Devdutt Dalal starts in 3, 2, 1. You interestingly took something called land economics,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So tell us what exactly were you studying at that point
For
in
sure.
time, and how that kind of
Yeah, it's a very unique course, probably one of the only colleges that offers it. I initially was more inclined to do physics and maths and so on and so forth, but then I started falling in love with economics. But I didn't love economics enough to be just doing pure economics.
Okay.
And then when I was researching degrees, I came across land economy, which was essentially a tripos of economics, law, and environment.
Okay. Very interesting.
So it was like, I thought it was like, okay, economics is great. I love it. Some general understanding of law. And then obviously the environment I realized was going to be super interesting and important. And I guess like at that time, sustainability was an abstract concept.
Correct.
But if you break sustainability down, it is sort of, economics, development studies, sociology, law, etc. All of these disciplines sort of play into the understanding of what sustainability is. So I thought it was a very relevant course at that time. So, it was all like the interdisciplinary nature of these three facets, all geared towards the built environment, maybe a little bit of real estate finance, so on and so forth. So I just thought it was a very broad and useful set of learnings. And it's obviously come full circle in terms of everything I did since. But yeah, it was.
You worked with players like Deutsche and BCG. What was that experience like for you? Was it something that you were kind of getting accustomed with, or was it something that was bothering you in your life?
I did the 2 internships which you mentioned, and then the third one was at a food company. I didn't love BCG and Deutsche Bank, and I'm glad that I learned over 2 months or 3 months of interning with these companies.
But what happened at BCG?
No, nothing in that sense. I was just like, didn't find the work to be very meaningful, and I don't mean to I think, look, I have a lot of my friends right now from HBS. They're all in the Bain, BCG, McKinsey.
Because that's a mecca for them, right?
Yeah, and I think there's an inherent value, obviously, to consultants, and they help big businesses solve big problems and make big decisions. But I think the role that I was playing at BCG as like a little intern part of a team that was called the knowledge team, which is kind of like a research team, and just sort of being the one that makes like one graph that goes on one slide that goes into a deck. Like I was just like, obviously I wasn't getting arrogant about where I sit. Obviously I knew my place over there, but I was just like, okay, well, instead of making this graph, do I really want to making the slide? Instead of making the slide, do I really want to making the deck? And I thought probably not for me. It was good though. I mean, a lot of learning, a lot of like, explored a few different industries. At that time I was working on some e-commerce. BCG was pitching for some e-commerce deals from the Snap deals and the first wave of e-commerce that I started in India. So it was quite interesting to learn about that. And then randomly I was moved on to something that had to do with cement. So it was a lot of like, cross learning. So I think it was great. Like they have a lot of like knowledge and research and insights and so on and so forth. But I didn't think that was going to be my career path.
And if not consulting, you tried Deutsche as well. You thought that probably IB could be the the way that you can.
Yeah, I was more in equity sales and trading, and frankly, I mean, my last name and my family business over the years has been stockbroking and merchant banking, investment banking, so on and so forth. So I thought that was within my blood. But again, I mean, I thought it was good again. Like I worked on a very niche project with Deutsche Bank, which was quite exciting. It was at that time the Iran regulation sort of embargo was about to be lifted, and there was going to be some sort of peace talks with the world. So Deutsche Bank was exploring, and I don't know if I can say this, it's old enough now, but at that time it was kind of like a secret project or whatever it is.
Okay.
But yeah, anyway, I was again a very small cog in the machine. But yeah, no, it was interesting. I mean, like they had those like walls, and like I think they used to call them Chinese walls or whatever it is. But like there was the research desk that couldn't interact with the equity sales and trading desk, but they were like literally just separated by one glass wall. So like there is a lot of that like secrecy and or rather like privacy or confidentiality culture. So yeah, I think that does create a little bit of siloed ways of working, etc.
Right.
But not that affected my time there. It was again a little bit more like I'm a little bit more of a tangible hands and feet type of guy. Like I like seeing an input and an output, and figuring out like how you're going to get that input and where's that output going to go, and that sort of like thought process is definitely more exciting than like researching balance sheets and clicking on buttons.
Is that why you decided that you want to probably join your father's business as well, because you were seeing that input and
so as I mentioned, so the third internship I did was in Germany. It was with a company called Rudolf Wild. They're like they make Capri Sun. So if you've ever had the pouch of fruit juices, so they make Capri Sun. And in fact, my family business was a supplier to this business. So that's how I sort of got in touch with some of the guys there. And but that was the only internship where I felt like alive. Like I could. The information coming inside and outside of me was making the most sense, and I realized that okay, look, the thing that I'm giving the most productive output towards is this food supply chain type of business. And
probably that's why these internships also become important.
Absolutely.
To figure out which space do you actually want to get into.
Correct.
Right? Maybe the institute wants you to get into one particular sector, and you probably will not do a great job at it because you don't like it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's super valuable to try your hand at multiple things, unless you know what you want, which is absolutely fine. Like you can be self-aware. I think self-awareness is the key over here, right? Like these type of experiences just build self-awareness in terms of like as long as you're cognizant and you reflect on, hey, did I really enjoy my day making spreadsheets for an equity trade, or did I enjoy my day making a graph for a deck, or did I enjoy my day, just learning about how we can improve the supplier's productivity and communication on sustainability. So those type of things.
So when this exploration was happening and then you came back, you finally decided that you wanted to join your father's business. How did you come to that conclusion, if I may ask? And what did you do in those 3, 4, 5 years that you built this business along with your father?
This is early 2016. A lot of our customers like Coca-Cola, Unilever, PepsiCo, and others, they all had sustainable sourcing requirements, and no one in my I think everybody in my family business is like 45 plus, very like as you can imagine with a typical sort of family business setup is. So nobody really understood what that concept was, and I just spent 3 years studying this, and I was like let me take a stab at this. I would spend like 3 to 4 months traveling from Dapoli, which is northern Konkan coast, all the way down to Sindhudurg, which is the southern Konkan coast, then make my way into sort of Dharwad, Hubli, that northern Karnataka region, and then drive back. So I would spend literally like a lot of time with the agrarian community, farming community. So I got a lot of first-hand insight over there, which was super important. It also like allowed for me to do a nice bottom-up learning curve, right? So as I learned along, so the first year or two I spent implementing sustainability, so Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, Global Gap, those were some of the certifications that we worked towards. Brought in like inputs for farmers, you know, did lots of random side things, so intercropping within mango trees with tomato seeds, and you know, just a lot of like random ideas to try and see what would work and what would port. A lot of them were at more pilot scale, demo scale, and then over time like farmers were like, hey, you know, we like your ideas over here, we want to. So it started from like 80 farmers, became 500, became 800, became 1500, you know, every season or every quarter it would keep increasing. So that was great. So that's what I did for the first couple of years. Then moved on to factory sustainability. So mango is the largest sort of product that my family business would process. So buying mangoes, making it into a single strength pulp or into a concentrate, which would go into juices or ice creams or any of those type of applications. The mango, 50% of it is pulp, the rest is stone and peel. Which before I came, we used to pay somebody to take this off the waste of our premises because of the pollution and environmental compliance issues. And this was, you know, 3-4 years before I came. At the time that I came, I think it was kind of, okay, we don't pay you anything, you don't pay us anything, just like take this waste off. Yeah. Today where we are, like that's amongst the most high value value stream that we have in the business. So it's interesting. I mean, so the peel, there's both low value and high value applications. So when I was there, I started with low value because it was low investment, low budget. So you got to build towards, you know, the first thing we need to do is separate the peel and the stone. So that was the first machine we bought, separating the peel and the stone. So now we at least had 2 sources of waste. And with the peel, what we did then was just make compost out of it. So we put a little bit of a microbial decomposer. It became a compost. We put it in bags and we sent it back to the mango farmers that made these peels. So it was kind of like a loop of the nutrient cycle. So a truck would come in with mangoes and it would go back to collect the next set of mangoes, but it would take back this composted peel from the last season or a few seasons ago. So farmers were super excited that they had like this whole nutrient rebalance happening, and it actually did impact yields and so on and so forth, because it's literally what left that tree has kind of gone back. So our factories were in Valsad and Nashik and in Chittoor. All three are like 45-degree plus type of environment. So the waste comes in a little bit wet, but you leave it out to dry in the sun for like a day or two. The stones are actually very high calorie fuel. So for almost 6 months or 7 months, instead of buying agro briquettes, like we would just be using our mango stones. And there's also high value applications for that. So you can extract mango butter from the stone.
I think you kind of had your B school learning implemented there itself without even getting into a B school. And probably you could tell me better, if you had this figured out already, like this experience was already there, you knew how to kind of scale up a particular business because you had a family business also, you could have decided to scale this business up itself because you were doing fantastically, as you just said. But you decided otherwise, you wanted to go back and study. What prompted this decision, and why did you not stay back in India and study? Because you said that you wanted to work here, that's why you probably came back and started working here. What changed?
So I felt my own lacks and maybe frustrations also in the family business. Like I wanted to become more of a decision maker, I wanted to have more of a seat at the table, that sort of thought process. And that's why the thoughts of maybe an MBA, maybe business school, maybe a master's of some sort would allow me to get very specific skill sets in terms of how I balance myself as an individual. A lot of my work was traveling for 3 hours to this place and that place, and all of that went away. So like I did gain a lot of time during COVID, and that's when I did the GMAT and decided to apply. Frankly, I only applied to 2 schools. So to the point that you were making, it was like, okay, this is my opportunity cost is quite high. Yeah. I was enjoying what I was doing, so on and so forth. But it was just like, okay, these are like 2 dream opportunities, probably the only time that I can do this. With HBS, there's a lot of Indians over there. Like second after the US would be Indians, and Indians from India and then Indian origin.
What is the number now? Do you have a...
So in my class was special because it was the post-COVID. Yeah. So they had scaled down on COVID batches. So typically there's 900 students in an HBS class. I think for the class of 22 and the class of 21, they had scaled that down to 700 or so. Or maybe it was just the class of 22 that they scaled down to 700. So they had to redistribute these 100, 150 people to the 2 years. So my batch was actually almost 1,000 people.
Oh, wow.
So it should have been 900. It became close to 1,000. And within that 1,000, I would say Indian passport holders from India who have had experiences in India or maybe elsewhere, but definitely Indian nationality, I would say it was probably 40, 50, which is fairly large. Yeah. And then if you add like Indian origin Americans, then another maybe 50 more. So you saw a lot of like, Indians.
10% of that batch.
I would say, yeah, by and large, yeah. My GMAT score was 730.
730.
Yeah.
730 you got you
it was
Harvard.
Like flush median.
How did you get through? Like let's talk about this. How does one get into an institute like Harvard where you dream that you want to become part of that because you want that brand name probably, or the kind of exposure that you get?
Yeah, it's a tough one, man. It's I think what they're looking for is I think directional intentionality. So like you may not have it all figured out and you may not have a path that goes there, but like as long as you're reflecting on, okay, I did this because it made me do this, and because I did this, it made me do this, and then okay, here I am right now, and with this piece of education, I'm going to go this way. So it's a lot of like they value people that have had some sort of like a common stream or like a common string of experiences, or it may not have been common, but there's a reasoning as to like why that path was the way that path was. So I think the story for some of these business schools is very important. The GMAT is a little bit of a tick, right? It's not, if you get 790 or you get 700, like really, I don't think it's going to influence whether you're getting in or not, or like 800 even for that matter. Like, so I think it has to be like that. 730 is the median, so anything plus minus 20 of that, I think you're in a good zone. You don't want to be too far below the median because then your burden of proof is a lot higher, because like, okay, your story could be good, but like, look, we have these 800s who have kind of a similar story. So like, so that's one thing that I think Harvard in particular values. So it's not just a CV thing. It's just about, okay, like, yeah, we've seen the CV, good experiences. Again, those I feel like are ticks, right? Like, okay, you've got the internship at Deutsche Bank, or you've got the 2 years work experience at this private equity or that consulting, etc., etc. So that also is everybody has. But what differentiates you is the story. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Why is this important for you? Like, why would we put a bet on you to be the one that, like, now builds the reputation of our school, etc. And is your voice valued in the classroom? Because in HBS it's only case discussions, and everything is like learned from your peers.
That reminds me, Lev, that a lot of these schools in India that we go to, they're proud of the fact that they have HBS case studies, right? They take pride in that fact, and we got inspired with one of the HBS classroom that was being shot, and it's on YouTube, and a lot of people have seen that, and we kind of started our own property called Take a Seat in a Classroom, where we started showing how case study discussions happen in India, right? What exactly happens in these case study discussions? So does that make you just an audience, or you take part in this? What do you solve, and how do you learn from this?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a very unique system of education. I think it's great. I think at the end of, you do 500 cases approximately through your 2 years at HBS. At the end of it, I think the learning that they're trying to make you go home with is, with little information, how informed decision you can make, and can you say something sensible in a room full of people that are much smarter than you. That's literally like, okay, confidence in yourself, trying to pick up on pieces of context, but looping in your existing knowledge to try and make sense of, let's say that it's even 2 lines that you read about something, like, can you still make an informed opinion when you're in a boardroom or a meeting room, and still say something that's worthwhile and valuable. So I mean, again, different topics or different discourses are taught differently, but in HBS it's all a case study method. So I think, for example, I would critique or I would give feedback that like things like accounting is probably not best done through a case method. Like, you want it a little bit more top down to say like, okay, this is how you do accounting. I never done accounting before, but like, but the beauty is that even in the accounting classroom, you have like 30% of the students who have some like really deep insight into accounting and how they did accounting in their own businesses. So their perspectives really help. for example. But it's driven by the professor. So what happens is everybody gets the case. You're supposed to read the case. It's 20 pages, 30 pages, depending on what topic it is. So everybody reads that case. The professor does a really good job at contextualizing the case by sourcing opinion. So the professors barely speak. It's almost like, hey, you read the case. Like, what did you learn, or what did you read? So everybody will first lay out the context. Then there's a specific prompt or a problem that they pre-send you, which is going to be the core topic of the discussion. It could be a decision. More often than not, it's a decision. So you put your mind in the head of an entrepreneur or a manager or a leader or whatever, and you have a node, right? Should I go option A? Should I go option B? Context is similar for both. They'll give you some sort of insight or math that, okay, like let me do some modeling whether it should be a or B, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the core crux of it. So it forces you to put yourself in the mind of what would you do? And it could be from various perspectives, right? It could be financial, it could be economic, it could be ethics, it could be, accountability. It could be so many things that like you think, oh, wait, if I was in the mind of that entrepreneur that I read about, like what would I have taken? And at that time I said something, so A, I want to be consistent with it. I don't want to be a hypocritical, or somebody else told me something that made me think, oh, this was not the way that I should have been thinking about it, and then your opinion therefore changes. What HBS does really well is, okay, so they first segment you in sections, but then you have like all these random trips, right? So for example, you have this thing called field, which is groups of 6 or 7 that go to a city, in the US. At the time for us, it was in the US because of COVID and so on and so forth, but internationally otherwise. So you go to Argentina, Peru, this, that, and then you go and work with a business in Peru, you go and work with a business in Argentina and Brazil. But what they do really well is they slice and dice and shuffle you up very well, right? So over the course of the 2 years, even though your section's only 90 people, all of these like random opportunities, and I'd say there's like 10, 15, 20 where they like make you do small group things and this and that, like it gets you in close contact with, I'd say, at least 300 or 400 of that class of 1,000. From the summer onwards is where I became a lot more in the entrepreneurship startup sort of ecosystem within Harvard, and I can speak to that as well, because that's when then I started activating things outside of the classroom. And honestly, I stopped indexing on the classroom at all, because I was like, okay, this is definitely more important, because this is now where I want to be. And we just applied for one, and on a business plan, right? Like on a written business plan, like we had actually no on ground traction or no like partnerships or nothing, just ideas. But wrote it down, and somehow one of these early stage competition guys gave us like $25,000 or something like that, and we were like, okay. We had to set up an entity to get that check, because we didn't even have this, and we didn't think that we were going to win or whatever. But anyway, that was the first step on, okay, somebody believed in this idea, like let's explore this further. Great. So that was the genesis. Yeah.
Let's now talk about, I'm moving towards the second part of this conversation, which is more going to be around how do you set up a climate tech organization or an agri-tech organization or a startup in a market like India, right? We were trying to contextualize it for people who are interested in this space, and probably you can tell me better because you have done it fresh out of HBS. So what exactly happens in the market study that you do and the industry study that you do, and what kind of challenges come your way, if you can sum it up a little bit?
Yeah, I think you said climate tech and ag tech. I think the main component is somebody that understands tech, and that was not me. And Chavi does a little bit, but like again, that was not him. So we needed like specialist talent or specialist knowledgeable people that knew or had solved similar problems in other regions, or had some sort of like ideas on how they would solve for the problem in India. So that's our third co-founder, who's his name's Nate, and he's a PhD in remote sensing and geospatial engineering and so on and so forth. So that became the element that we ended up taking. But I'd say, yeah, I think there's definitely an understanding of the business context is super important. So some existing relationships, some contextual knowledge, some experience and background, and having had like, what steps do you not take at all, right? Like, because what happens with some people, if you don't have any idea, like you're taking bad steps in the very early days and then you lose momentum. I think the key for a startup is to keep having like you'll have bad days 100%, but like you need something that knocks you back up every now and again.
In a market like this, what are the differentiation from an Indian market, say, and a market in US, where you probably have studied also and seen how it's developing? Was it a crude shock for you, or you were prepared for it?
Yeah, I think no, it's you're right in the fact that it's not as sexy or not as like spoken about in India right now, and fair enough in a way. The government is doing stuff, by the way. They're a little bit more silent on it, a little bit more I'd say step by step, we have a lot of other things to solve for right now. Electricity, water, like basic, like, infrastructural issues. I think climate is a little bit more of a luxury topic for a country like India, I'll be honest. It's necessary, and we're the ones that are going to face it first. You know, South Asia, Southeast Asia, so on and so forth, is poised to be much worse in terms of its, in terms of the impacts of climate change. So yes, I would hope that it's a little bit more spoken about and vocalized and made sexy, as you said. A, regulations, so a lot more impetus on regulations. B, I mean, we have a lot of tech in India, but like in general, the UK, I mean not the UK, the US has the schools like MIT and Stanford and Harvard, and their labs are like always churning out like, oh, this membrane that will like hold carbon, or this like solution that will absorb the carbon and put it into the soil, and this and that. So there's just a lot more like innovation happening over there. So it's like a mix, right? If you have innovation, you have VC, and then they kind of coincide. In India, I think our innovations exist, but they've not been like very deeply focused on climate. And I think they have, I mean, we have got some like very cool, startups based out of India, and some cool IP and some cool tech being built out of India as well. So I'm not demeaning that at all, but just the volume is a little bit smaller here. But yeah, I mean, it has to start somewhere. So here now VCs are the ones that are like vocalizing the fact that, okay, do sustainability, do climate, do ag. There's a couple of that are very much focused on just these topics, and they'll bring in finance from LPs from around the world and so on and so forth.
But in your understanding from the impact and scalability point of view, which are these climate tech areas or startups or places where it can actually boom, or you can find a bigger market?
So our biggest contributor to emissions and so on and so forth is still like thermal power. So like, whether that's coal or so on and so forth. So if there's any innovation, any thought process, any change in the way that we can generate energy, that's the biggest problem solver for India. In terms of like human impact, what we're trying to do with agriculture and that space, I think that's huge. In terms of impact on society, like we spoke about the air quality and so on and so forth, like biomass management, whether that's stubble of rice or of sugarcane, that's huge, because that's like problems that are like universally faced. And if you are solving for agriculture, then you have like several million hectares of farmland and several million individuals working in agriculture. So that's kind of more of a direct impact.
What is happening with the agriculture space? How bad is it for the environment right now because of the stress that we have on rice and wheat? And how much of an ecological pressure it puts in a country like India because of the sheer demand that we have?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, it is the largest crop in India, so like it's solving for at least 25 to 30% of the problems. As we speak about agriculture, like rice is 25% of all our agricultural land is growing rice. Rice is the biggest problem with rice is it's a massive water guzzler. It takes like 3,000 liters to farm 1 kg of rice, 20 million liters per hectare. We have 46 million hectares of rice. So you do 46 million multiplied by 20 million, I don't even know how many zeros that is, right? Yeah. All of the regions where this is grown, eastern coast of India, so from your West Bengal down to Tamil Nadu, even in the west, I think rice is grown all over the country, but your main regions will be Indo-Gangetic Plain and the eastern coast. Yeah. All of these regions, if you look at water tables, groundwater tables, far lower than what they need to be. And in parallel, you have studies by your, even the Niti Ayogs and more international studies also on the fact that India is going to be water scarce. We are already water scarce, but we're going to be in acute water scarcity by 2030. We'll have 2 times the amount of demand that we need supply, and then we have supply. And putting 2 and 2 together, I think rice is a massive consumer of this groundwater, and that's why we thought this is quite an important problem to solve. So that's one massive environmental issue with rice, and sugarcane has a similar water footprint. Yeah. It's also larger season, so there's again depending on.
We are seeing that in Maharashtra, and we are seeing that in Punjab also. The water scarcity problem that you said for both sugarcane and rice.
Yeah, and AP, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Karnataka, all of these states. And then the second problem, of course, with rice is the stubble burning piece, right? So because the government has very short windows for the MSP for rice and then for wheat, the time between rice harvest and wheat planting is very short. And the only thing that a farmer can do when you have to, finish your harvest and then start your next crop within 10 days is like burn whatever's left, right? They don't have time to collect the stubble, neither do they have time to let that stubble disintegrate or decompose into the soil, which would be the ideal, regeneration of its nutrients back into the soil that it came from. So yeah, that's the reason that the stubble is burnt. The ash is fine. Like the ash helps with loosening the soil and it helps with the wheat, but it's not the main reason they do it. The main reason they do it is because the windows are so short, and then year on year the seasons have been shifting a little bit. So again, it adds much more pressure, and that's why over the last 5, 7, 10 years we've seen this as a much larger problem. I mean, growing up, it was a thing, but it wasn't obvious to us. I don't know if you had the same perspective, but it's just become much worse over the last 8, 10 years. So I'd say the water piece, the stubble burning piece are the two main things. The water piece is interesting because when you have stagnant water on a rice field for a long period of time, that's where you have conditions of anaerobic digestion. And in that process, you have the bacteria in the soil, the shoots of the plant, they're releasing methane into the air instead of normal photosynthesis, which releases oxygen and carbon dioxide. When you do it underwater, it causes methane release. That's rice growing across the world, and India is the largest rice grower by land area. Rice growing and methane emissions from rice, when you convert that back into carbon dioxide, because everything gets measured on carbon dioxide equivalents, rice farming is as bad as aviation. So you have a lot of people that are offering, when you take your British Airways flight, they'll say, oh, do you want to offset your flight with pay $50 or whatever it is. I think that's fine and it's great, but theoretically it should be done with every bag of rice that you buy, because the problem is equivalent.
So from the stubble burning side of things, you mentioned about MSP. I have one line question, and you could choose to avoid it if you want. Is MSP good or bad?
That's a great question, man. I've been asked that a lot of times, and I don't know where my I don't know where to go from a political view or but purely from economics. I think if you remember demand and supply diagrams, and if you talk about minimum wage or anything, you have the basic line that goes through, and you have a misalignment with quantity demanded and quantity supplied. That's where I'll probably leave my answer over there. That there is dead weight loss, there is market failure, there is. So I think it's less efficient than otherwise, but it's also protectionist, and I totally appreciate that sort of thought process. And I think farmers would realize, I think there's two things that will happen, right? We grow too much of certain things that we don't need because we want to stockpile and keep and so on and so forth. And that's fine maybe, but then then farmers get tuned to that. They're like, okay, well, why should I grow something else? If I'm growing rice, I'm growing rice. Ideally, they shouldn't be growing so much rice. We have stockpiles of rice that get wasted. Some days there's less, some days there's more. So there's no forecasting or planning on how much food we actually need, how much grain we actually need. So this whole government buying of food for storage and food security, I think is good naturally because we're such a large country and we need that. But it's also messing up the market dynamics, right? So if you let an efficient market dictate what the price is, maybe some farmers who can grow rice more efficiently will grow it, but others won't. And then maybe you'll have more bajra and jowar and all of those kind of things.
But even when you're promising 80 crore people rice, how can you not produce it?
No, absolutely, and it's rice is a massive contributor to our country's calories and the world's calories. So absolutely fine, but I still feel there is wastage of rice. I think we're producing more than we need in some situations. In some situations, we produce less, so we stop. We ban the export, so on and so forth. So, as I said, there's no forecasting, or there's no science in terms of how much we're actually producing. So, blanket MSPs for everybody that wants to grow rice is probably not the way forward. Is my thought process. And if there's no rice, then the thought process is that you could, over time, consumer patterns may change. Rice is not a very nutritious crop as well. It's good, but it's there's better crops. More indigenous crops, more nutritional crops. So yeah, that's what I'd sort of said. But it's a very complex and loaded question. So take whatever I said with a pinch of salt.
Let me get back to the business strategy. Then probably that somebody needs to have when they're actively working towards a climate tech startup, right? Like yours. what are the kind of components that they need to keep in mind? Do they keep the stakeholders in mind? Do they keep the business in mind? Do they keep the overall ecology in mind? What do they keep in mind? And if you can break it down with some examples that are happening right now from probably the EV space that is pretty hot right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, it really kind of depends. I think the aim of the game here is to attract finance and attract capital towards solving these problems, right? So, like, whoever's funding this or cares about this intervention, whoever your market is really. So I could say that could be, in our case, when we talk about agriculture and sort of, smallholder farmers and so on and so forth, there's like a source of philanthropic capital as well that might be interesting to do. Government subsidies, for example. These are all like opportunities to build a business that appeases those type of outcomes, right? So when I speak about like water management, so on and so forth, a lot of the large companies, their foundations and stuff, they have mandates on reducing water, or will put CSR towards funding water programs, blah, blah, blah. So like that's one way of governance. So I would say like following a market that is willing to pay for this is the way forward to, building a business model, right? So in our case, it could be philanthropies and governments, but it could also be when we generate carbon credits, there's, voluntary carbon market buyers or compliance carbon market buyers that have made commitments to net zero, carbon neutrality, so on and so forth. So you build an intervention that appeases their requirements. That's one. With the EVs and so on and so forth, I think it's a little bit more on the efficiency of the technology, right? Like the one that's more efficient, the one that does better, will probably be the one that is adopted more and wins. So I'd maybe say that's kind of like, you have to understand what role you're playing in the space. I don't think that, in our case, I don't think the most efficient tech is the differentiator. I think it's more program management and sort of getting behavior change done, so on and so forth. So like each stakeholder and each intervention will, have its own more important stakeholder or more important funder or more important.
Let's give our audience a clear picture of what Metti Labs does, and then probably they'll be able to more understand what the stakeholders are.
Sure, for sure. So I already briefly mentioned the problems in rice. Conventional rice farming is unsustainable. The water consumption, methane emissions, burning. So there's 3 core interventions we like to work on ground, and I'll come to what we fundamentally do in a second. But the 3 that we're trying to change is, one is alternate wetting and drying. So change from conventionally flooding the field for the whole season, teach the farmer how they can periodically dry down their fields. So you arrest these conditions of anaerobic digestion. You've also saved half the water that the farmer is using. So instead of having now 30 irrigations, if they can get away with 15 or 20, you've extracted less groundwater, you've taken less water from a river or a canal, and at the same time you've arrested this methane emission problem. So that's one intervention, so alternate wetting and drying. Second one is direct seeding of rice. Direct seeding of rice also has a massive water reduction, so instead of puddling fields for 40-day periods, you dry seed, right? So you directly seed the field. The beauty of direct seeding of rice is one other thing, right? It shortens that crop cycle by 30 days. So that 10-day window that I was talking about between rice and wheat, now you have 30 to 40. That allows farmers to solve the third intervention, which is the stubble burning. So those are the 3 fundamental on-ground interventions that we're working on. All of these are monetizable are eligible, let's say, for carbon credit generation. Because you can quantify the reduction in a baseline field where there was a conventionally flooded field versus this new AWD treated field. And whatever that delta is can be quantified as a carbon reduction. What Metti Labs does is obviously is the link between all of these channels. So we work with the registries, we work with the investors or the carbon buyers, we work with the farmers through implementation partners, and we're essentially the common, or say we're the enabler of this ecosystem. What differentiates us is the tech that we've built in terms of remote sensing. So the biggest issue with, this is an issue I faced when I was at my family business, right? We were doing a program to certify 10,000 farmers under Rainforest Alliance. It's physically impossible for an auditor to go and check all 10,000 farms. So they take a square root or they take a randomized sample, so on and so forth. And in that process, you have like say 100 farmers that you're going to visit. And even if they're randomizing which farms they select, you still have to plan logistics, right? So the field agents know, okay, Monday ko we'll go to these 10 farms, Tuesday we'll go to these 20. And then in that process, they start filling up the documents at night. So there's no reliability on human field extension to do data collection and monitoring for large programs. I think they're still great at handholding, changing farm practices, so on and so forth. So that I do not question human field extension, but I just think that as programs scale, and I spoke about 46 million hectares, like there's no way that we'll have humans going and checking each each farm, right? Because each of our parcels of land are like small. In the US, where you have like 10,000 hectares worth of farmland, you can go to that farmer once and ask the questions, and fine, you've got an answer for 10,000. Here, you have to meet 10,000 farmers to understand 10,000 hectares.
Because we have small farmers here more than.
So the only solution to build trust, transparency, credibility, robustness in a sustainability intervention or a climate intervention that is focused on ag would be to have remote sensing or geospatial engineering tech that can sort of, monitor a single acre at a high resolution through the length of a season, etc., etc. So that's what we do.
Tell me one story of a farmer actually coming up to you and telling you things that made you rethink about your idea or product that you have pitched them.
So we're doing projects in Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Haryana. The pitch is different for every one of them. So a farmer in Odisha, smallholder farmer in Odisha is not making massive bottom line because he's not growing basmati. But a Punjab and Haryana guy is making a lot of money from basmati. So for there, it's 100% the rice miller sort of incentive to say, I'm specifying this is what you need to do because my customers, Walmart, Tesco, all these guys in the UK and in the US, they want low carbon footprint rice. So that's that sort of stream of argument. In AP and Telangana, they've had acute water shortage of late, and so over there it's like, okay, this is a climate adaptation technology for you. We're going to teach you how to farm with less water. So in some cases it's monetary incentive, in some cases it's, oh, I'm facing this water problem, show me how I can do it differently. In some cases it's a little bit more like, no, if you don't do it this way, we won't buy from you. So I think those are some of the learnings that you have to be very, you have your ears close to the ground.
Help me understand this, Devdutt, because of this answer that you gave me, it came to my mind. So the US markets where we are, or the offshore markets where we are kind of exporting this rice, they are coming in telling you that we cannot have rice which has a particular amount of carbon credit attached to it.
Carbon footprint
attached to it.
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, it's governed by two things, right? One is these guys have all committed to carbon neutrality. For example, Walmart and Tesco. Let's say take Tesco, for example, has committed to carbon neutrality. Their entire supply chain, therefore, needs to be carbon neutral.
Okay.
Which means that if they're buying rice that has an emissions footprint of, say, 1.6 kg CO2 per kg, that needs to be arrested or needs to be addressed. And as a result, they would tell their supplier or their the importer that is bringing their rice over there, who will tell the rice manufacturer or the miller that no, you need to change this because our scope 3 emissions are being affected by this.
Right.
So that's the way that this mechanism works, and it's a real case in point. Like the Tesco, one of the rice millers that we're in touch with, they said that in their next order, Tesco wants 10% of their current order, which is say 50,000 metric tons. They want 5,000 metric tons of rice to be certified under SRP, which is Sustainable Rice Platform, or low carbon footprint assessed. So that's where the sort of mandate or market is being created as a result of these guys wanting to label their rice as low carbon footprint or
And how big this Indian exporting of rice market is, or the
it's
number
relatively
is?
small, to be honest. It's not huge. There's a couple of things in that as well, right? So one is the actual physical export of the rice. So that's more your basmatis and stuff that would go to markets around the world. So there is a decent chunk, but I'd say it's a 2% type of ballgame. So there you have your, LT Foods and KRBL and the Dawat and India Gate and those type of brands that are doing well. Ebro, which does Tilda, etc. So these are some of the brands that do more of the export type of businesses. And then you have an interesting set that are buying lots of rice, but are like MNCs. So for example, Diageo, which makes alcohols and spirits and that kind of stuff, they buy a bunch of broken rice for their distillates to make rice spirit. And for them also on a global level, they've committed to carbon neutrality. And even if they buy more barley and wheat for their beers and so on and so forth, they actually, the scope 3 emissions or the emissions from rice is significant. It's like almost 90% of the emissions, because wheat and barley and stuff are not as emittive as crops. So that's another one. So your Nestle's for baby food, Olam as a trader, or Diageo, AB InBev, all of these kind of companies. That's where the more food related sort of thrust or impetus would come.
Understood. Yeah. But so the major problem right now at this moment is fulfilling the needs of India's rice production demands in itself, where the largest amount of emissions or methane gas emissions that
Yeah.
happens because of the rice production is happening right now. It's not because of the exports that we are doing. It's primarily to feed our own people where we are putting
Correct.
that effort.
Correct, 100%. And that's why, so what we're doing is, and you asked this question as well, right? Like, rice is an important crop for food security.
Yeah.
There is like this, history of consumption of rice in these parts of the world,
Yeah.
and it is still a significant contributor. So fundamentally for us, we're not trying to change rice farming. We don't want to tell a farmer, hey, stop growing rice and start doing jowar or whatever. We want to teach the farmer how they can continue to grow rice, the same yield, but with less water, with less methane emissions attached to it, so on and so forth. So it's as much of a climate adaptation story, because the farmer needs to learn how to farm with less water anyway.
Yeah.
The reality is there's going to be less water. And then the reality is also that we have many more mouths to feed. So yes, while balancing the fact that we want to maintain yields, but at the same time reduce consumption of key resources, I think that's the play that we're.
For people who are working in the climate tech or in this space where clean tech is also a concept that's coming up, where EVs also fit in, there's a lot of challenge in the adoption of people that's coming in, right?
Yeah.
And that probably is a problem that you are also facing right now, because you have had systems in place that you don't want to change. You have seen kind of your forefathers doing it, and that's what you probably are saying, the new farmers, and they are saying that what is in it for us that we would change, right? So that adoption becomes a big problem whenever you have that shift or a new idea being implemented. How does a startup like your or an MNC which has the power to make certain changes approach this problem of adoption?
At the end of the day, like, incentivizing is the name of the game, right? If you want to make a behavior change or you want to make an adoption change of some sort, like, there needs to be some sort of incentive in place. So in our case, if we want to make farmers change the way that they farm, like, does that mean we provide them all of the new set of inputs that are more climate friendly? So, lower nitrogen fertilizers or biofertilizers, or the right hybrid seed that does not need as much pesticide later on, etc., etc. So that's one way of incentivizing the farmer to say, hey, we're bringing you all of this. It's better for you. We'll give it to you much cheaper than market because we've got bulk scale, blah, blah, blah. That. Or it's the revenue from the carbon credit, which 80% of which we pass back to the farmer. So is that like an incentive change that a farmer would want to adopt? Enabling and incentivizing, I think these are the two cruxes for anything behavior / adoption change related, or regulation, right? Like, that's your third, like, okay, no, everybody has to buy EVs, or you can't drive in Bombay.
Any country which has taken regulation very seriously that we can learn from for adoption of such practices?
I mean, the UK, for example, London has the zoning of what is it called, the emission zone or whatever it is, and you can't drive the cars, or if you drive a car through the city of London, then you pay like a tax every time you drive it. That's been like one sort of semi-successful intervention, at least that's something that we had studied in the past. Lots of mandates on compliance markets as well. So Japan's taken a step to specify that all of their companies have to comply with carbon neutrality, which means that if a company is not carbon neutral, I'm sure there'd be repercussions of some sort of fines or some sort of, so that type of incentive, like we've seen obviously, so this is Japan with the learnings of what happened with the EU trading scheme, which has been the sort of pioneer or the early days of Kyoto Protocol, and then also the emissions trading system in the EU. So I think we've got like learnings, we've got things that worked, that didn't work. So I think we're building better thesis, a better thesis on how we can, really get good regulation. But yeah, it's not quick and dirty to say, yeah, okay, regulation applies and behavior change happens.
And you said that also that VCs are opening up to ideas like this, and you're seeing that probably in Bangalore where you're actively working as well. What is that space looking like 5 years from now, in your opinion? Do you see that more and more VCs coming in, investing in a lot of these climate tech startups in India? Do you think that approach is going to be, changed within the mindset of these very founders who are coming up with new ideas but are scared right now, probably because they don't know whether they're solving a real problem or not?
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a 100%. I think in India so far, VC investment has been focused on consumer and fintech. I would say like those are the two major buckets. I think that's great, and it will still continue to grow because our consumption story and our sort of just consumer base is so large. But I think, yes, in terms of differentiation, diversification, there are certain entities that want social good attached to the investments that they make. There is definitely a budding and building ag tech, climate tech, sustainability ecosystem. But then there's also obviously like space tech and Gen AI and so on and so forth. So there's a lot more now, I think, appetite for deep tech, because consumer and fintech is a little bit more like tangible and you can feel it. So your quick commerce, e-commerce, this, that, so on and so forth. Like all of those things are a little bit more. But now I think there are more funds willing to take larger bets and sort of a little bit more random ideas, let's say. But I don't think it's like a robust ecosystem yet. I think you just have a few leaders that are doing it right now. But frankly, like at the time that we graduated from HBS, I think climate tech was amongst the only industries that had what they call dry powder, which is everybody wanted to fund a climate tech business. So it's a little bit dictated by like that, what is available, right? Like I should build a business to where there's market or there is somebody that really wants to fund this type of problem. So that can only happen with like conversations and understanding a little bit more about what do these VCs want. And
someone who has seen a side of business already, tried building things within the family setup, then going and having a formal degree from the best possible B school in the world, and then coming back to India, having that perfect Swadesh moment for you and trying to build something from this country, for this country and its farmers. Where next? And do you think that the quest that you were on to find yourself, you have gotten that answer so far?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think I'm super happy where I am right now. I'm super motivated by this problem statement. I'm grateful for the co-founders that I have, the team that we've built out, the investors and their belief in us, so on and so forth. So I feel like I'm definitely like locked in for really like solving this thesis on changing the way rice is farmed within India currently. It's quite a niche thesis, which means that okay, what's next, right? So can we expand into other crops or other interventions within India? Or do we look at the rice problem in other parts of the world, which is Bangladesh, Nepal, Myanmar, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, etc. Like the future for me, and I already said this when I promised myself when I went to HBS that I would do ag in India. I think that thesis will never go, just because like ag will never go. We'll always need to feed ourselves, and we'll always need to drink water, and we'll always need to breathe clean air. So like that's definitely where my like future is almost always going to stay. I don't know, actually we'll see in 5 years from now what life is like, but
and very few people take this route is what I can tell you from the experiences that I have had of talking to people, and that's probably is why we do Conversations Cafe podcast. This season's focus is more on people who have done things what was not expected of them, and you kind of fit the bill. If you liked the episode today, do share it with people who think in a similar line, and if you've gotten something out of this, do tell us in the comments below what are some of your learnings from this particular episode. Do tell us which are some of the other guests that we should bring on this particular show and talk to. Thank you very much, Devdutt, and all the very best for
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.